Folks, you better get ready because GameStop has a major catalyst coming tomorrow morning. The Roaring Kitty scheduled a YouTube live stream for tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Pacific time. In today's video, I'm going to break down exactly what the latest is on Roaring Kitty's position, what you can expect to happen in tomorrow's live stream, and some predictions on GME stock, as well as going into some of the deeper short squeeze, short interest data, and some of the things that we're seeing beneath the surface right now. We're going to get right to work in a few moments, timestamps down below. But first, always remember, if you're the one taking the risk, you got to be the one doing the ultimate frisk. You must do your own due diligence on all ideas presented here on the channel. Also, quick plug, if you'd like to learn how to analyze and trade options, as well as get access to our private chat, as well as our options alerts, in honor of Roaring Kitty, we've decided to do a Kitty 50% off sale on ZipTrader options. Right now is a very critical time to learn how to trade options and get options ideas, because right now is one of the hottest markets we've seen in years for options traders. For example, just today, our GME 40 strike calls that we alerted to options members back in mid-May went up about 159% just today alone. And if you bought them near lows last week, they'd have nearly 10x'd, probably will complete the 10x by tomorrow. This is how folks like Roaring Kitty are able to grow their options positions so fast, by selecting the correct contracts. We also alerted some new GME calls right before close today that we believe are going to do very well heading into tomorrow, the live stream, and then specifically next week. Now, I can't promise that all of our ideas are going to do well, but I can promise they're all going to be well thought out and well researched and useful to read through. Anyways, make sure to take advantage of that Kitty 50 coupon code, and we'll see you in the options program. Okay, let's go ahead and get to work. So GME took off today, going as high as $50+ in the after hours. And since the beginning of Roaring Kitty's return, he's managed to keep springing interest on the stock again and again and again. At first with the constant memes, then with showing his position and the Uno reverse card, and now he's coming on YouTube for his first live stream in years. And if you look at Roaring Kitty's YouTube views, they can hit up to 1 million eyeballs plus. And this was back in 2021 era. Imagine what's going to happen now after years and that big movie that was about him and all of the excitement and enthusiasm and attention that has been brewing because of the original meme posts back in mid-May. And while his tweets do get some 12+ million impressions themselves, the truth is that this YouTube live stream might be the first time in years where he actually explains what he's thinking and the current GME situation that is warranting his continued position and his massive options position. This might be the first opportunity where we get something that's not just memes and a post of the current portfolio. The quality of communication has the chance of being much higher for this live stream, which I believe will only work in his favor. Now, Charlie, isn't there a chance that he just ends up memeing again on this YouTube video? Well, certainly there's a possibility, but I don't see why he would do that. He hasn't done that in past YouTube videos, and quite frankly, it's going to get people a lot more interested in the stock if he simply presents his research as he has done years in the past. Now, at the same time, my guess is he is going to be somewhat more cryptic because of the SEC scrutiny on him, and anyone with hundreds of millions of dollars of exposure in any particular stock is going to certainly have a team of lawyers consulting him on what is a low-risk thing to say. My guess is that this entire ordeal was carefully thought out and planned and legally scrutinized months in advance. And I believe tomorrow he's going to do somewhat of a presentation on his research and on his latest due diligence update, which is really all that markets want and need. Understanding the thesis and whether something has changed in the thesis. Maybe he'll explain that he's trying to buy up the entire float. Who knows? But anyway, circling around here, look, there's one thing that I believe that the Roaring Kitty could do that would really cause markets to go crazy tomorrow, and that is execute his call options live. This is what I said on X a few minutes ago. Quote, if Roaring Kitty decides to exercise his GME options on the live stream tomorrow, thereby forcing market makers / brokers to cough up 12 million GME shares out of thin air for him to buy, well, prepare for one of the most epic rallies in history. Forcing market makers to come up with 12 million shares that almost certainly are impossible to find at the same time with millions of eyeballs on him, well, that could cause a spike that we have never ever seen before in GME. Now, if you think about my tweet for a few minutes, you'll start thinking, okay, well, there's a few problems with this idea. Firstly, maybe he's not even able to exercise the options. In the last disclosure he made, he doesn't seem to have enough dough to exercise all of the options, but still, he could exercise some of them. Or perhaps, I mean, if you're on E-Trade, if you're on any of these platforms, you know that it's easy to have just another account. And it would be part of the show to say, hey, you know what? I have this $29 million in cash, but I also have another account that I didn't show you with another $100 million in cash or some access to margin that all of a sudden I'm going to pull from thin air to exercise these calls live. I think that would really create a show for this stock. I think you would get the spike of a century if all of a sudden he was able to exercise all those calls live on air tomorrow. And honestly, I don't think it's impossible for him to come up with that money given the amount of money he was able to come up for that first position. But bigger picture, if we can can get up to 45 on the anticipation of a Kitty live stream, if we can get into 64 bucks, 80 bucks on Kitty simply posting memes, we can almost certainly shoot higher on a complete breakdown of what he's in the position for. So even if tomorrow he comes on and he's just like, I like the stock, here's 2 reasons I like the stock, that's enough to get the next wave of retail traders interested in the stock and create a more justified reasoning for a ultimate short squeeze. You have to understand right now that Roaring Kitty has every incentive in the world to continue the current strategy of bringing more and more attention to the stock and sharing his thesis more and more. Not only will he be celebrated as a hero in the retail community for years to come, but he's also on track to be a billionaire if GME hits just $69. Now let's back up a second. How much money does Roaring Kitty have in total GME positions right now? Well, he just disclosed something in the extended hours today. He posted that he has over $500 million. $232 million in GME shares, $324 million in June 21st expiry $20 strike call options, and he still has that $29 million bucks in cash. At least these are the 3 things that we can see. It's easy to have another sweep account or another near cash account that has more cash in it. Maybe he has that, maybe he doesn't, but based on what he's disclosed, we see these 3 different line items. And you look over at the quantities, this guy has sold nothing, 5 million in shares and 120,000 in calls, just like his last disclosure post. And again, if you do the math on this, if Roaring Kitty was to be a billionaire, he only needs GME to hit about 69, 70 bucks. If that happens, Roaring Kitty is a roaring billionaire, at least on paper. And that brings us over to the main question of today's video, which is going to impact next week and the week after's trading of GME by leaps and bounds. And that big question is, what is Roaring Kitty going to do with his options? I presented on the 4 things he could do with them in the last video, and I said, number 1, he could exercise them, allowing him to buy GME shares for $20. He could sell them without exercising them, but this would be a disaster because there's simply not enough liquidity in the market for his calls to do that. And the same thing with rolling over. If he was to roll them out to further out expiration dates, well, he'd still have to sell the current ones, and again, liquidity issue. Or lastly, he could simply elect to continue holding them and let markets execute him out at the end if they continue to be in the money, aka if GME is still above 20 bucks a share on June 21st, he could just allow them to expire in the money and automatically get executed out. Now, number 1 and number 4 are best for the squeeze because they involve forcing markets to find some 12 million in shares for him and selling them to him at $20. Number 4, same thing, but it's more risky because if he continues holding them, it gives Roaring Kitty's many enemies a huge incentive to drive the price down below $20, so he loses his 300 plus million bucks, which would weaken him and the overall surge in excitement significantly. So my take is that it makes sense for him not to wait until expiration, but simply to exercise a large portion of them, if not all of them, before that expiration date. Even better if he could do it on the live stream tomorrow. Maybe he doesn't have the cash, then he has to do it next week. Maybe he has to wait another week. But still, the key here is if he forces brokers, market makers to find 12 million shares in a very, very limited and unexpected time frame, well, all of a sudden that could be a game changer for the squeeze setup, causing the float to be exposed as very, very limited a lot earlier than otherwise would be expected. Now, to talk a little bit more about whether or not he even ever will have the possibility of executing these options, you got to remember that this is a guy that put some $60 million plus on this options position to begin with. There's no way, in my opinion, that he was able to make that bet without some sort of way to execute out had they ended up being profitable on the other side. There's no way that he thought, okay, I'm going to go in this and I'm just going to lose the $60 million and never be able to execute. No, he had some sort of way of getting that cash. Maybe he had cash somewhere else. Maybe he had outside financing. Whatever it is, I believe that there's no way that he doesn't have the ability to eventually exercise these options. It looks to me that his goal is to buy up as many GME shares as possible and lock up as much of the float as possible. The more he buys, the less of the float that is out there, the more the short sellers get punched, and the more that retail gets excited, causing the price to go up even further. Okay, next I want to go into the squeeze situation. So obviously we've had some pretty aggressive moves since early May, and lots of people have made lots of money, and that's great, but at the same time, this is really just one part of the story. The stock has been running the last month or two based almost solely on Roaring Kitty's excitement. But again, that's just one part of the story. You see, the original thesis on GME wasn't that it would make money because lots of retail traders would buy in. It was that it would eventually squeeze as a result of buying pressure. There's supposed to be a bigger picture catalyst at the end of this overall story, right? It's a light at the end of the tunnel, which is why GME holders have always felt justified holding at any price. It's because they see the potential for that bigger short squeeze. So what is the situation on that short squeeze? Is it becoming true? Is it already happening? What is the situation? Well, if you want to analyze a short squeeze, you got to look at the short squeeze data, and you pull up Ortex data. Well, short interest has actually climbed up about 5% in the last 7 days, which means shorts are not closing, shorts are not covering, which is exactly what would need to happen for a squeeze to be qualified. Shorts are actually increasing their short positions week after week, not decreasing them. So no squeeze has happened yet. Right now, short interest as a percentage of free float is estimated to be nearly 20%. And I got to tell you, 20% is a potentially very misleading number. Yes, 20% of a free float is high regardless of the overall situation with the rest of the free float. But with GME, a stock that is largely owned by retail or other buy and hold type investors, what that means is to say that a 20% short interest as a percentage of free float is probably closer to having an effect of a 60, 70, or 80% of free float short interest. Since most of the overall free float isn't actually free, it's just being bought and held, well, that means that while on paper the short interest might only be 20%, well, the effect is much, much higher because the rest of the free float isn't really free, it's locked. I mean, this isn't just speculation. Some 25% of total GME shares are direct registered, which keeps them far away from being lent out to brokers and market makers for further short selling behavior. And this doesn't even consider that some half of all short volume is done on off exchanges. So overall, I mean, look, the short squeeze setup here is very, very hot. The question is if the overall enthusiasm will continue building and brewing, and a lot of that does have to do with Roaring Kitty. We'll see exactly what happens in tomorrow's live stream, but at the end of the day, folks, very, very interesting story developing here. As always, I like to say, regardless of the story, you don't want to fall too much in love with the story that you forget about certain risk management tools, like not using too much of your account on any kind of position, having a clear entry and exit plan for any position, not going into anything that you don't completely understand, not considering the downsides. If eventually GME heads into another one of those couple-year winters where it goes down rapidly and all of a sudden Roaring Kitty decides, okay, I'm just going to go ahead and dump a bunch of my shares. You never know what's going to happen, and I don't believe in blindly trusting anything. I believe in looking at the story, looking at the data, analyzing it, and making some risk managed forecasts based on the data that we have in front of us and based on human psychology patterns. Anyways, let us know what you think is going to come next for GameStop stock in the comment section down below, and we'll see you in the next video. Also, make sure to take advantage of that Kitty50 coupon code on ZipTrader options. See you in the next one, folks.